Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our live revision session today, where we are going to be covering designing and evaluating research methods. I'm Lara, this is Sarah here, and we're going to be leading you through the session. Just a reminder that you can watch this back on playback, and to make sure that you pop your answers in the chat box this evening, because it is an interactive session. Okay, we'll get started. Over to you.
Thank you, Lara. Good evening, everybody. So just to give you a rundown, excuse me, of the assessment objectives that are obviously in the A-level, but the ones we're covering tonight. So assessment objective 1 is knowledge and understanding. We're not touching too much on that tonight. Tonight we'll be looking at AO2 and AO3, so application and also evaluation. So let's first have a look at designing research. So you have to be familiar with the design decisions that the researchers must consider. So for example, the sampling technique, and also the evaluation of that research method and the design decision. So why they chose to use that, what are the good things about using that method, and what are the bad things. So for example, the strengths of the sampling technique, or perhaps the strengths of using time sampling, for example. So let's have a look at some design decisions. So certain things that could be something that they're considering and choosing is the choice of experiment. So things like a lab, a field, a natural, or a quasi experiment. So a tricky question that comes up and something that students sometimes struggle with is the difference between a natural and a quasi experiment. So if you know the answer here, please do contribute in the chat. We'd like to know what's your perception or understanding of the difference between a natural and a quasi experiment. Just give a second to see if anything pops up in the chat. I can see lots of you online, so it'd be great to see your contributions. A tricky question that students do struggle with, so even just give it a guess in the chat would be nice to see kind of what you're thinking. So someone said quasi varies naturally within the person themselves. Thank you for that contribution. Absolutely. Natural is an untouched IV, and a quasi is a predetermined IV like gender. Fantastic. Yeah, let's get our answer up. You're absolutely right. One other contribution there, you said natural experiment is one where the IV occurs naturally, for example, a natural disaster, and a quasi is where the variable are already pre-existing, for example, disability. Absolutely, really, really well done. So the way that we've defined it is natural experiments take advantage of naturally occurring variables such as an earthquake. So we had a similar example there in the chat, whereas quasi experiments take advantage of a naturally occurring variable about the participant. So something that's fixed, like gender, for example, or we've put on here, for example, whether they have anxiety or not. Thank you so much for your contributions there. Let's have a look at another question. So the choice of experimental design is important to consider as well. So for example, independent groups design, repeated measures, or a matched pairs design. So why might a researcher use an independent groups design rather than a repeated measures design? So hopefully automatically your mind is sort of evaluating both of them and seeing why in some cases an independent groups design might be more appropriate. So again, answers in the chat would be great if you can. So why might a researcher use an independent groups design rather than a repeated measures design? What might be a strength of an independent groups design over a repeated measures design? Thank you for your contributions. Lots of you there I can see have mentioned order effects. So there aren't any order effects in an independent groups design. Well done. To reduce demand characteristics, get similar things there. Independent groups design has less likelihood of order effects, whereas repeated measures has order effects. Good. Okay. Quicker, no order effects. Nice. Lots of mention there of order effects. You're absolutely right. So order effects obviously occur in a repeated measures design because all the participants are doing all of the conditions. So we have said the same thing. Repeated measures design results in order effects. Participant performance is affected by fatigue or rehearsal due to taking part in more than one condition. In contrast, this is avoided if an independent groups design, meaning results are more valid. Thank you for your contributions there. Fantastic. Well done. So looking at designing observations then. So observation designs there's lots to consider with an observation. So considering whether you're doing a participant or a non-participant observation. So is the observer taking part in whatever the task is? Controlled or natural. So are we doing a controlled observation, like for example Bandura's Bobo doll study, or is it a natural observation in a natural environment, for example observing children in a school playground? Is it covert or overt? So is the observer undercover? Is it, done via camera and participants aren't aware that they're being observed? Or is it overt, where they are very aware that they're being observed and they can actually see the observer? And the choice of the sampling method as well, not to be confused with sampling techniques in how we sample participants, but sampling methods in observations is all about time or event sampling, so how you are collecting your data. Thank you for that. So now we're going to have a look at a task, and it's tell me why. So we're going to see where the spinner lands, and we're going to answer a question. Again, we're looking for contributions, please, in the chat. So give me an explanation, please, on, let's see where the spinner lands. Anticipation. There we go. So it says researchers must carefully decide on behavioural categories. So tell me why. Why is it important that researchers must carefully decide on behavioural categories? Why is it important to be careful when constructing our behavioural categories? In the chat, please, would be lovely. So researchers must carefully decide on behavioural categories. Let's see. All of your comments will pop up all at the same time, I'm sure. Why is it important to be careful when identifying behavioural categories? To make it reliable and objective. Fantastic. That's definitely necessary. Objective meaning kind of measurable. Absolutely. We don't want any ambiguity there. Let's see if anyone else comes up with anything before we show our answer. Yeah, so they're not ambiguous, so tallies are reliable. Fab, good contributions. To ensure behaviour categories can be clearly seen and reliable, inter-rater reliability can be established easier. Absolutely, good. Oh, and someone's mentioned about operationalising. Fantastic, well done. Making sure the behavioural categories are measurable and specific, can't be vague or taken for something else. Fantastic, really well done. Let's have a look and see what we've put on the board. So to improve reliability between observers and to ensure they measure the behaviour as intended and do not overlap. Fantastic, really well done. Thank you for your contributions. Let's have a look there at another one then. So again, tell me why. Let's see what it's going to land on this time. Okay, so tell me why controlled observations are more compatible with the aims of science than natural observations. So again, answers in the chat would be lovely, please. Controlled observations are more compatible with the aims of science than natural observations. So why does control align well with science over a natural observation? Again, looking for responses there in the chat. Thank you so much for all of your contributions this evening, everyone. So why are controlled observations more compatible with the aims of science than natural? Can carefully manipulate the independent variables. Fantastic. What's a good thing about doing that though as well? Greater control of variables, controls extraneous variables, allowing for cause and effect to be found. With natural observations, there is a lack of control of variables. Control observations are replicable, can be done again by another researcher. There's more control over extraneous variables. Fantastic. The comments are coming in thick and fast. Therefore, results are more scientific and accurate. Higher objectivity. Fantastic. Good. Really well done. A word I am looking for that I can't see in the chat a good word to use would be about standardized procedures as well, which aids what you guys have said about replicability, reliability. Fantastic. So they are replicable and extraneous variables are controlled, whereas in a natural observation, these features are not present. Fantastic. Really well done. Thank you for your contributions there. Should we have a look at another one? So tell me why. Where's it going to land this time? Okay, so tell me why observations can lack internal validity. So why can observations sometimes lack internal validity? Think about what internal validity is versus external. Again, answers in the chat, please. Observations can lack internal validity. So internal validity is all about, are we measuring what we intended to measure, or has something perhaps caused a change in what was being measured in the study. So why can observations lack internal validity? Subjectivity, if procedures aren't standardized, possibly, absolutely. Anything else anyone want to contribute there? Lack of control over extraneous variables. Okay, definitely all contributing some accurate answers there. Really, we're sort of looking for an inference to demand characteristics. So with observations, participants may change their behaviour due to being observed, and there may be issues with the behavioural categories as well. So if participants are changing their behaviour because they know they're being observed, then you're possibly not measuring what you intended to measure, and that can impact the validity. Well done. Thank you for your contributions there. I think I'm passing back over to Lara now.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so looking at designing self-report methods, we have our interviews and questionnaires. Now for interviews, we need to remember that we can have structured, so these are prepared questions and they're asked to everyone, so every participant. There's also semi-structured and unstructured. So semi-structured is we have some prepared questions that are used, and unstructured is obviously really kind of a bit more of a kind of snowball into a conversation with maybe some prompts that are used. Now, questionnaires, don't forget that the format for questionnaires, we can have either closed or open questions, and we've got a couple of questions on that later on. So we're going to have a look at some short answered questions now. So what do you know? So what type of data is typically gathered in interviews? So answers in the chat box, guys, when you're ready. So what type of data? And again, we're just looking for, a very brief answer for this one. Excellent, well done, Angel. Excellent, you got in there first. Qualitative, I can see we've all said qualitative there. Yeah, absolutely correct, okay. And again, students often sometimes get these a bit muddled in the exam, so a really nice way to remember the difference between qualitative and quantitative. Think qualitative it sounds like quality. Okay, so you're talking about kind of personal opinions, that rich detail, okay, rather than quantitative is numbers, okay. Excellent, let's have a look at question 2. So we've got, why might a researcher prefer to use an interview rather than a questionnaire? Yeah, someone's put primary data there in as well, absolutely. And yeah, that is a type of data as well, primary, secondary, qualitative, quantitative, well done. So why might a researcher prefer to use an interview rather than a questionnaire? So again, looking for some elaboration here for this one, for number 2. Okay, so you've put here, might establish some rapport. So what is my question to that? If we're establishing rapport there more so with an interview rather than a questionnaire, what is that going to equate to? We can get more rich info, potentially, yep, less demand characteristics. An interview provides more detail, excellent, gives more insight, it's in depth. Okay, yeah, we can pick up things such as body language as well. I don't think anyone's put that down yet, but maybe some of you are thinking it. So yeah, and we can also allow, with an interview, participants, if they're not sure on a particular answer, response, or whatever, or question, they can request assistance, okay, and get clarity. Whereas on a questionnaire, that's not so easy to do. Okay, so number 3, both self-report methods can use open questions. So what is the advantage of using open questions? And again, kind of going to be quite similar to some of the answers we've already had in the chat box, but let's have a go. So what's the advantage of using open questions? And again, think about what the other type of questions is. The other type of questions, closed questions. So really think about that. We're not asking you to compare here, but what are the pros of doing open questions? Yeah, excellent. Well done, Clouds. Yeah, data is more rich in detail. Excellent. Yeah. So if we've got more detail, we're going to have a bit more insight, aren't we? Yeah, absolutely. Really good. Well done. Perfect. Okay, let's have a look at a categorize game now. So you're going to have 60 seconds. The way I'm going to encourage you guys to do this is if you just put in the chat box case studies, content analysis, experiments, and then you can just write the numbers that correspond to each. Okay, so you've got to categorize these 8 features into one of those 3 subheadings, and we're going to see if we can get one person and get all the correct answers here tonight. So you've got 60 seconds. Time starts now. Okay, our time's up. So whatever answers you've got, guys, if you want to pop them into the chat box. Harris Boy, you got that correct for case studies. So case studies is, of course, 3, 5, and 6. I'm just trying to see if I can read the other ones. So we've got experiments. Ooh, experiments, we've got number 1 and 8, but not 7. Let's see what we've got for content analysis. We've got 7, 4, but not 2, so that might be a bit of a clue there. So yeah, we might have a couple muddled there, 2 and 1 muddled. Okay, so again, case studies, they're not replicable, obviously, because they're very unique to the individual, the small group being studied. They're conducted with a personal small group, as I said, and can investigate unusual or unique behaviour. Now, if we have a look at content analysis, again, just to remind you what content analysis is, it does involve tallying and coding, don't forget. And we can obviously analyse materials such as newspapers, and it tends to be replicable. So we can ask different observers, raters, if you like, to do the same content analysis on that same newspaper, for example. And experiments here, great to establish cause and effect. I think most of you got that one. Involves an IV and DV, that's a big giveaway. And it's replicable depending on what type is used. Now, can anyone tell me what I mean by that? When we say it's replicable depending on what type is used, there are different types of experiments. We've covered a few of them already. What do we mean by that? What are we referring to there? So, for example, maybe what type of experiments might not be so easy to be replicated, do you think? Yeah, potentially a field. We've still got a little bit of control in a field, yeah, but it's nowhere near as highly controlled as a lab experiment because it's done in a more natural setting. But we are still controlling variables with a field, don't forget. And natural cannot be fully replicable. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, well done. Spot on. Excellent. Okay, back over to you then, Sarah.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to look at some news headlines. Ultimately, you need to identify what the missing word is in the news headline in the sentence. So in the chat, we're just looking for a word or sometimes a short phrase. So experiments are the only research method that use and what are we looking for here? It is 2 words missing here. So experiments are the only research method that use and what are we looking for? can you put your suggestion in the chat for me? So experiments are the only research method that use the fact that it's an over a, I think, is possibly a bit of a hint. Just waiting for comments to drop up. So someone said standardized method, not necessarily wrong, but it's not the answer we're looking for. Independent variable, lovely. Let's have a look and reveal it. Fantastic, really well done if you got independent variable. Let's have a look at another one. So researchers using blank blank in observations may miss relevant behaviour. So researchers using something something, again 2 words, in observations may miss relevant behaviour. What are we looking for there? Fantastic, really well done, Tyler, in quickly with time sampling. Fantastic, that is a real issue with time sampling. We may miss relevant behaviour when we're not observing. Okay, let's look at a third one. So research methods are something something if they replicate real situations, emotions, and consequences. So again, we're looking for 2 words here. Research methods are something something if they replicate real situations, emotions, and consequences. What could that one be? Couple of you have put event sampling in the chat for the previous one. Just make sure you have an understanding of the difference between time sampling and event sampling. Time sampling is the one where you may miss some behaviours because perhaps you're not observing. Although event sampling, if your behavioural categories weren't well organised, you could, but hopefully the planning would prevent that. Externally valid, ecologically valid, fantastic, either would work. Ecologically valid is what we were looking for. Ecological validity is, of course, a type of external validity. Fantastic, let's have a look at another one. So something, just one word, data, can gather detailed information if there is enough of it. So if there is enough of it, if we gather enough data, it can be considered detailed. What do we think? Someone might be perhaps a bit more challenging, but thinking outside of the box. Fantastic, well done, Tyler, in there quickly with quantitative. It can be detailed if we've got enough information, but of course, generally we would say that qualitative data is collecting the depth and the detail. Fantastic, let's have a look at just 2 more. So one more one word we're looking for here. Something of observations can be improved by ensuring categories of behaviour do not overlap and that all researchers are in agreement about them. What are we looking for here? So something of observations can be improved by ensuring categories of behaviour don't overlap and all researchers are in agreement about them. Just having a look to see if anything pops up in the chat. Something of observations can be improved if we make sure. Reliability, I see there, fantastic. I can see a few different mixed answers there, but really well done if you said reliability. That's improved if your behavioural categories are well organised in that they don't overlap. And if researchers agree, then hopefully you've got consistency, which reflects with reliability. Yes, it's referring to inter-rater reliability, fantastic. Okay, let's look at our last one then. So case studies can involve many research methods, including interviews, experiments, and what could be the missing gap here. We tend to call this process triangulation. So case studies tend to use triangulation where we collect data through a number of different methods in an attempt to gain good quality data. Observations, really well done there, Angel. Thank you so much for your contribution. Observations would work perfectly there. So I'm going to pass back over to Lara to finish us up with our last task.
Okay, so we're just going to finish with some example questions now. And these questions are really trying to tease out this practice of your application, okay? And you're going to see some terminology you're very familiar with, hopefully, where we see in this study, okay? And when we see this, the examiner is really wanting you to contextualise your answer. So we've got a researcher who wants to investigate attitudes towards the addition of a new local library in an estate. She wants to know whether people found it beneficial or whether they were concerned about the additional traffic it could cause. Identify one self-report method the researcher could use in this study and then next you've got to justify your decision. So it's not enough just to identify the self-report method. And there are options here, by the way, guys. As long as you justify your decision, that's good enough. So over to you. Let's have some answers in the chat box now. Okay, like I said, there are numerous avenues you could go down here to answer this one. And remember to make sure that you're contextualizing it to the study, because it clearly says could use in this study. And again, justification is very important as well. Yeah, excellent. So we've got one answer here for interviews and justification. Yep. Definitely could build a rapport. And yeah, when we're saying that we can get a greater idea of people's opinions, I guess what we're saying here, it's going to generate more rich, detailed, meaningful information, potentially, we could say. Really good, really well done. Any other answers we've got for this one? So we've got interview. Anyone got a different answer they want to share? Yeah, okay, so we could say questionnaire as well, really well done. And again, that's kind of, it does tend to be the go-to actually when students are trying to justify a questionnaire that, oh, it's quick and we can give it to a large number of residents. And that's great, but maybe I could arguably say not quite contextualised enough. And there is some kind of answers missing here with the questionnaires. God, they're all coming in so quick. Yeah, so let's reveal what we've got for us. Some of you have been quite specific with your questionnaires, such as closed questions. That's great. So interview, like you guys have said, because the residents in the area could be asked questions face to face, don't forget, towards their attitudes towards the library. And this could generate more meaningful information and allow elaboration. Now, obviously, we have another option here, as a lot of you have already written down questionnaire. And this is because the residents can complete questions about the library anonymously, and therefore maybe give a more honest opinion without fear of being judged. Okay, so again, yes, we could also maybe potentially reach a bigger remit of a sample size as well with questionnaires, because it's quite easy to hand out. But this is just another answer that you could have thought about as well. Good. Okay, so the next question, we've got a researcher wants to investigate attitudes towards the addition of a new local library in an estate. So it's the same question. You have to write one question that the researcher could ask that would gather qualitative data. So it's got to generate qualitative data, not quantitative. So what is a question that the researcher could ask? And remember, they want to find out whether people found it beneficial or whether they were concerned about the additional traffic it could cause. So remember here, you're having to formulate a question, okay? Okay, so yeah, so we've got how do you feel about the new local library in an estate? Yeah, really good. How do you feel about it in your area? Excellent. What's your opinion on the new library in the estate? Really good answers coming through, really good suggestive questions. Yeah, so we've got a couple of examples here, similar to what you guys have actually given in the chat box this evening, which is great. So explain how you feel about the new library in your area. Well done. And also, do you think there are any benefits to having a library nearby? Okay, let's have a look at our next question then. So this time we've got a different STEM. So a researcher experimented to investigate how frustration affected concentration. She asked participants to sit in a controlled room on their own and complete a puzzle. The time it took them to complete the puzzle was recorded, with a quicker time indicating better concentration. 20 participants completed the puzzle in an incredibly hot room, and 20 completed the puzzle at room temperature. So the question here, identify the experimental method used and give one advantage of it in this study. So again, there are two parts to this question. You're going to have to identify what the experimental method is for a mark, and then again, we've got an advantage with some elaboration of it in the context of the study explained. So let's see if we can get a full answer for this one. Okay, so remember that experimental method is different from experimental design. And yeah, it does tend to be an area that students sometimes muddle, and that's fine. But just know experimental design is how we design where our participants go. So that's like independent, repeated, matched. Experimental method is the method we used to investigate. Okay. So we've got Harris, well done. You've put a lab experiment, advantages, control. Okay, so again, think about, have we contextualised that to that study? That's what the examiner's really going to be looking for. Okay, that might only be a mark out of 3 potentially, yeah? Again, can I pick your answer up and put it for another answer to do with evaluating a lab? You've got to contextualise it to the study. This is what we're really, really looking for. So again, I think we're all pretty much, those of us that have answered this, on the same page with the method of it being a lab experiment. Really, really good. But how can we make that specific? Well, what we're going to say, this allows the research to control the room and ensure that the only thing that's affecting concentration is the temperature of the room. And that therefore means that it's going to be easy to control the different heat levels in the rooms. So again, that's completely contextualised, okay? All right, we're going to have a look at our last question this evening then. So our last question here, we've got the same STEM. Identify one extraneous variable and how it could affect the results of the study. So again, two parts of the question, identifying the extraneous variable and then explaining how that could affect the results of the study. Yeah, some really good answers coming through that just come through a bit late for the previous question on lab experiments. So really well done for those guys. Clouds unknown. So what maybe could we say here? What could be an extraneous variable? So a variable that could affect the DV, that could muddle the results potentially. Yep, things like energy drinks. We could even bring that into the remit of medications potentially as well. Yep, excellent. Let's have a look at our answer then. So we've got medications that participants are taking can affect how hot they feel temperatures. So for example, people on weight loss medication can become hotter quicker than others, which again could affect concentration rather than the heat of the room itself. So some really, really great answers coming in there, guys, for the application. But don't forget, really, really important to make sure when we see in this study that you really contextualise your answer so it's not generic, okay? So don't forget you can watch this back on playback and we will be seeing you again next Tuesday, okay, at the same time for research methods. All right, guys, well done. Thank you.
Well done.